kid from the bush who grew into a legend in his own lunchtime, former SAS soldier Michael J. Malone has seen it all. This is Never Die Wondering, Mick Malone in his own words, hosted by the man himself, Mick Malone, along with Toby Malone, as they examine this long, storied career in the Australian Special Forces. Join us each week for behind-the-scenes insight, exclusive readings, and brutally honest truths from a true original. Welcome to Never Die Wondering. Welcome to episode 7 of Never Die Wondering, Mick Malone in his own words, a podcast that explores the life and legend of Michael John Malone, OAM. My name is Toby Malone, Mick Malone's son and co-host of this podcast series, joined by the man whose name is in the title, Mick Malone. G'day, Dad. How you going?
Hey, Tobe. Good to see you, mate.
You too. You too. It seems like you're enjoying this process, just to getting to
it's good.
Read it through. That's good. I'm glad. It took me a while to get you convinced by it. I sometimes think I need to plant an idea and then wait a little bit for you to come around to it, and then you come back and say, I think it's a good idea we do a podcast. I think, all right, good. So it's a fun way of getting this. I think I made a podcast myself last year, and one of the priorities I had was making sure that I had as many people on there as I could that from my life, so that I had recordings of all of those things. My grandmother, your mother-in-law, recorded all of her memories on tape in the last decade of her life, and it's a fairly important record that we have. So I like to think of this as a similar kind of thing. It's an important record for us to have of your memories and based around your military career.
Mackie and Bridie's will love it.
I think so. Yeah, I think that's probably the idea. So my kids are 16 and 13, and hopefully this is something that's good for them to hear, and it's nice. So the last episode we spent talking about the beginning of your career in infantry, where you were learning all the ropes and figuring out the ways in to that part of your career. And today we it was sort of a bit of a curveball, the idea of shifting away from going off to Vietnam with 7RAR. Was it a difficult decision to make when you were given an alternative that wasn't RAR, when someone said, well, we'll go and check out this SAS thing, but were you torn?
I think we're all looking forward to the adventure of it, as explained in this next chapter.
Yeah.
SAS, and it was sort of something that was whispered behind closed doors, and it was all very much look at that, it's a Sandy Beret.
Mm.
So we thought, bugger that, we need to have a go at that stuff.
And you didn't really think about the logistics of having to go all the way to Western Australia?
Didn't think about any of that stuff.
What was the furthest away from home that you'd been? Was it Bathurst or Mudgee? I mean, is that
Bathurst? I think, yeah.
Yeah, so that was as far away as you'd been, and so it's a whole other thing.
It wasn't too far away, but it was a long way away for a young kid.
Yeah.
I'd been to Sydney once with my mother on an aeroplane. I don't know why we went to Sydney on an aeroplane, but we did. It was a Butler Airlines DC-3.
Mm.
I can still smell the fumes.
And of course, when you did go to Western Australia, it wasn't an aeroplane.
No, we weren't officers.
Yeah.
We were baggy asses.
So they put you on the train. But we'll get to that. So we're going to get into chapter 4 of Two Ranks on the Road, 35 Years of Australian Special Forces Service, by Michael J. Malone, OAM, published in 2024 by Imprimatur Books, Perth. This chapter, entitled The Sandy Beret, covers pages 27 to 33 in the print edition. The ebook may have slightly different page numbering, so follow from the beginning of that chapter. As we read, the body of the text will be read by author Mick Malone. Whenever we come across a footnote, we'll pause in the least disruptive way possible, and I will read the footnotes. And now, without further ado, 2 ranks on the road.
Chapter 4, the Sandy Beret, 1967. 15 minutes to shape a lifetime. The boys were getting a bit excited back in the line. Someone had spotted a couple of strangers walking around the centre. They were wearing sandy-coloured berets, and we really had no idea who they were. Someone whispered, "They're SAS." We'd never heard of SAS, nor had many others. I'd never heard of SAS, nor had many others. Some of the older blokes knew exactly who they were and why they were here. "It's a recruiting tour," said one of the corporals. "Anyone who wants to join the SAS, give me your names." Being dead set on going to Vietnam with 7RR, I had no intention of volunteering for something I knew little about until Rod Wallace said, "Come on, Malone, you weak bastard, let's both volunteer." Old mate Black Jack Dool said, "Yeah, but that can't be that hard." So all the blokes in our hut, plus put our names down in front to front an interview. And mates in the other huts like G.D. Smith, Dave Grieve, Johnny Davies, Alan Ingram, Swimmer Bates and Timmy Clutcliffe also nominated. Someone said, "At least it gives us a chance to get out of here." Not fully comprehending that we'd be going somewhere until we wouldn't be going anywhere until we finished the course. The next day, a schedule was posted on the notice board. Of the times each bloke had to front the recruiting board, 15 minutes to shape a lifetime. The list was in alphabetical order, and my name was smack in the middle, with Rod Wallace down the arse end.
Footnote: Rod always hated pay queues because he would always be down the end.
So, starting at 5 a.m., starting at 8 a.m., we were paraded up to a hut near the guard room and told to wait for our name to be called. One by one, we nervously opened the door and stepped inside to confront 3 hard-bitten dudes in battle dress. 2 of them wore Sandy Berets. The third one, a captain, wore a black hat. He, as it turned out, was the trick psychologist.
Footnote: or trick cyclist, as they were always known in the army.
The man in the middle introduced himself as Major Tom Marshall, SAS Regiment. "Sit down and don't speak unless spoken to." The third man was a sergeant who looked like he'd been everywhere, festooned with ribbons. Both the psych and the sergeant wrote furiously as Major Marshall asked one simple question: "Why do you want to join the SAS?" This question jolted me a bit as I stammered, "Seems like a good idea." I could have kicked myself. Surely they wanted something a bit more profound than that. It didn't seem to faze them, though. They asked various other questions about my personal life, and that was it. "March out, soldier." Back in the lines, there were blokes who had been through before me who didn't seem too worried about being picked up. I was excited because if I was successful, we'd be travelling all the way across the country to Perth, the home of the SAS. It would be a few days before the successful candidates list was posted on the notice board. In the meantime, we had an APC exercise with the CMF unit
Footnote: probably from the Lancers in Parramatta.
to do over the weekend and prepare for a day of infantry tank cooperation. We packed our field gear, ready for an early start. Weighed up big at breakfast and then paraded on the road. We marched down the hill to where the tracks were parked. We were briefed on certain protocols when using APCs. We were then allocated a track per section of 10 men and boarded up the ramp in a fairly squashy arrangement. Our platoon commander, sergeant and corporal, was spread out around the 3 APCs allocated to our platoon, and needless to say, found a spot for themselves on top of the hatch. This was going to be a great experience for all of us. Once they'd fired them up and the 2 MPs on their motorcycles were ready to go, we trundled out of the centre via a bottom gate and onto the main road. Rattling down the road towards Liverpool, I began to understand why these tankies were so full of themselves. The tracks gave them a feeling of power and superiority over man and beast. Once we got to Liverpool, we headed down towards the coast at around 40 kilometres an hour on the Princes Highway. We were quite comfortable in the back of this thing, and more than one bloke muttered about changing course from infantry to armour so they could spend their days rolling around in the track, as the tankies used to say. A fourth class ride is better than the first class walk, something picked up by vehicle mounted troops in the West later on. On the way down to the training area, the officer pored over his map with one of the corporals. Before we pulled up in a truck bay for a bite to eat, we had our own ration packs, so there was no need to go looking for food. We had hoped we'd stop at a truck stop garage and get a burger, but no such luck. On resuming, we trundled down the dirt track until into the training area. The tracks jockeyed around and dropped their ramps, and we got off. We shook out in a section order with Jack on the gun and me number two. We then proceeded off on a bearing of 200 metres where we came to a bush classroom with space to build mud maps. The whole platoon sat down on rough logs and waited. Our platoon commander then addressed us quickly before handing us over to the platoon sergeant,
Footnote, God number 2.
who detailed the activity for the rest of the day and which section would do what. One section was detailed as enemy, and they grabbed their gear and moved away. After an hour, the other two sections were to move in different directions with the purpose of sweeping the enemy into the area, sweeping the enemy from the area. It was the enemy's job to avoid, disrupt, and ambush. It became clear we would be out here overnight and would be sleeping rough. The platoon was briefed on what the day and the night routines would entail. As it was mid-afternoon, we struck out on a bearing, being led by the section corporal. The platoon commander and platoon sergeant tagged along with the other sections. We were not seated until we arrived back at the RV. One of our number was designated section signaller. He had to carry a radio and walk directly behind the corporal. We carried out various drills, from covering arcs, hand signals, spacing, and track crossings. We also carried out contact front drills, which were fun. Everyone had a magazine of blank rounds, and we were told to use them judiciously. We marched a couple of Ks that first day, and the corporal was reading the map as we went. At around 5 p.m, he called a halt, and everyone went to ground where they were. After about 10 minutes of listening for the supposed enemy, he called everyone into him and proceeded to go through all that we had done today. He seemed quite happy with our progress and the absence of whinges in the section. He went non-tack and were told, and we went non-tack and were told we were, and then move off to find a night harbour. Hunger had set in by now, and I ate my can of pork and beans cold, using the P38 with a spoon opener.
Footnote, the US Army can opener was labelled the P38. The Australian version had a spoon at one end, much to the amazement of the Americans.
P38 with a spoon. Then put on my hexy stove to boil water for a cup of tea, and that was done. That was me done. After everyone had eaten and packed their gear, bringing our rubbish with us in a sandbag, we headed off on another bearing. I had the feeling that the corporal had been here before. He knew every blade of grass and tree in the place. He was a good map reader and pointed out various landmarks along the way. He chose a night harbour in a copse of trees and thick scrub. Everyone had to clear their bed space, and 10 blokes asleep on the ground takes up a bit of space. But the kicker was we had to organise sentries till first light. We'd work in pairs, 2 hours on, then wake up the next pair. Sentry duty in the bush is a must. It is a most important aspect of soldiering. After a quiet night, except for the snoring, we packed up our gear and prepared to move. Breakfast would be had later. We moved through the bush at quite a brisk pace till we came to a well-used vehicle track. With a signal from the Sacco, we halted, watching our arcs of fire. He moved among us, detailing a track crossing drill, even organising the last man, tail end Charlie, to use a small branch to wipe out away our sign. Once across and consolidated, we marched about 100 metres where we propped for breakfast. As usual, our section corporal used our breakfast time to debrief us on our effort so far. He was quite determined to make sure we really learned the lessons of moving in the bush, distancing, watching our arcs, keeping in contact with the man in front and behind. These were valuable lessons, early lessons for soldiers about to be on the sharp end of the war in Vietnam. We then formed up to march back to the RV. The tracks had gone, and there were trucks waiting for us. The trundle back to Ingleburn passed without incident, as most blokes went to sleep. Back at the barracks, we dumped our gear in the hut, secured our rifles in the armoury, had a quick wash, and then headed for the mess. The other platoons were there back from their sojourn in the bush. The talk in the mess centred on 7RAR and SAS options. The next time we were to go to bush would be a platoon against platoon. What fun.
And that is the end of chapter 4 from Two Ranks in the Road, 35 Years of Australian Special Forces Services by Michael J. Malone, as read by the author. So you mentioned, there's a few times you've mentioned so far in the book about how much fun it was.
It was fun.
I think a lot of people would have a hard time with that because they would find it uncomfortable or difficult or frightening but do you think it just matched up to your personality?
I think so. A lot of it was to do with personality. We had the most amazing bunch of personalities you ever met in your day's march.
Yeah, it sounded like you all laughed a lot.
Oh, all the time laughing, shy-acting and carrying. No one was ever cranky with anybody.
Mm.
But it was just fun. It was just the Strulies, as we used to call the Aussie rules people, the Strulies. And they used to call us the rugger buggers. We just had a lot of fun. And when the fun went out of it, which it never did,
Yeah,
there were blokes there to pull people into line and say, hey, pull your head in.
right.
But, we had a few blokes who couldn't handle the grog, who made clowns of themselves, and they were pulled into gear. They were livened up.
Well, and then
And
anyone, we'll discover in a future chapter, anyone who says, no, I'm not going to do that or not going to participate in that, getting up early and running an exercise, they were quickly exited from, they
well,
didn't
they
put up with
were,
it.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. It's,
That bloke, never, no evidence he ever existed.
yeah, we'll talk about him in a couple chapters time. So,
Yeah.
yeah, it's interesting, but the fun of it is, I think, the thing that a lot of people would be maybe surprised by because it is still very serious. Everything that's
Oh, it is. But you had to laugh, and one of the essences of SAS was sense of humour.
yeah,
If you didn't have a sense of humour, you weren't going to get selected.
right,
I'm not talking about a sense of humour laughing at Mickey Mouse cartoons or that sort of stuff, but a sense of humour where you'd be freezing cold, soaking wet, and still be able to raise a laugh, look
yeah.
after your mates. and that was important. The whole thing.
Yeah. Yeah, well, it's a big I mean, it's a big part of the military law, the idea of being able to sing or being able to find some kind of something to hold on to in unthinkable
It
scenarios.
is. It is for sure.
Because if you stop and think too carefully about what you're doing or what the other bloke's trying to do to you, then you go mad.
Oh, big time. No, you sort of you couldn't handle it.
Hmm.
So you had to handle it, and you relied on your mates to keep you levelled and uh, on track. You
Yeah.
know.
Yeah, and speaking of tracks, I mean, you see, you talk about the APCs in this, and you're getting in the and rolling down the highway, and everyone thinking, "Oh, actually, this doesn't look so bad. Maybe I should change over." But you never had that thought.
Few blokes are talking like that.
Yeah,
I think they were growled at by some of the older blokes.
right. No, it's a fun one. This chapter doesn't have any photos in it. So often we would talk about the photos that are in the chapter, but there are no photos in this chapter.
No.
There will be in future ones. But yeah, and I think a lot of younger soldiers now would be surprised by the cursory nature of your SAS interview, the fact that you had 15 minutes and you were able to be so laconic about it. Oh, yeah, well, seems like a good idea, but you were still asked to come for selection.
Yeah.
Nowadays,
No, I
I
couldn't
think it's
believe
probably
it.
a bit more
I couldn't.
competitive.
I couldn't believe it. I asked some of the other guys, "What did you say?" Oh, I just said, "Sounds like a good idea." And they just wanted a bunch of blokes. Probably needed 30 to go across on the train to go on the next carter because of the squadron getting ready to go away. Another squadron just coming back, and a lot of blokes pulling the pin after their tour. They needed to replenish. It was the same with the battalions, the poor old battalions, God, they couldn't find enough blokes.
Hmm.
And that was just the way it was.
Yeah, well, it sets you up nicely. 15 minutes to shape a lifetime, like you say.
Hmm.
Yeah. Well, yeah. So another really interesting chapter. Lots of progress, and then as we'll get into the next chapter, you were called, told that you were selected or selected for selection at least,
Yeah, yeah.
and and suddenly the adventure really begins. So we'll talk about that one next week, where we'll get into a bit more of that context. So that is all the time we have this week for Never Die Wondering. Join us next week for the next installment of our exploration of Mick Malone's career as we get into the 5th chapter of the book itself, titled Selected for SAS Carter. If you have a copy of Two Ranks, read along with us. I've been Toby Malone, and thank you to Mick Malone for unfailingly joining me on this journey. Thanks, Dad. This has been Never Die Wondering, Mick Malone in his own words. For links to purchase your own copies of Mick's books, visit the show notes or mickmalone.com.au. This podcast is produced by Toby Malone, Joe Malone and Mick Malone, and engineered by Toby Malone. Theme music is The Happy Wanderer, the official SAS march, as reimagined by Cormac Malone and Meg Logue Malone. Yes, this is a family affair. This is a GM production in association with Imprimatur Books.